On behalf of the African Development Bank and the Climate and Development Special Fund for Africa, let me also express to the family, friends, colleagues, mentees, and the entire climate community our sincere condolences on the passing of Professor Ogallo. Professor Ogallo, you may remember, was the founding director of IPAC, and he led the construction of the now very modern IPAC Regional Center that is serving 11 countries in East Africa, in Nairobi. And his legacy lives on. May God rest his soul in eternal peace. Abubakar, thank you for inviting me to join this distinguished panel of speakers to help provide some perspectives on financing of climate services. Like Felipe offered in the beginning, the title you requested me to speak on was a little bit complicated. It's actually two in one. So there is the aspect of financing of climate services, and then there's the second aspect of what is the potential public-private partnership opportunities for national meteorological and hydrological services. And I am glad the previous speaker, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Ramtol, has offered some insights on enabling private sector engagement for climate services. But I think today, given that we have very little time, it will be nearly impossible to address that second piece of it. So if you will allow me, I know there's a lot of interest to know what is happening on the financing side. So if you allow me, let me share some perspectives on financing of climate services. Here at the bank and at the ClimDev Fund, we are focusing on 5 ways in which we are addressing and investing in modernizing and supporting the delivery of climate services in Africa. And over the last 10 years, we have deployed nearly $366 million on investments that are contributing to Hydromet, including observing systems. One, we are tackling a growing profile of extreme events. And I don't need to explain this. Amos talked about the desert locust invasion in East Africa. Many of you will know the tropical cyclones that were very active in the Southern Indian Ocean, Idai and Kenneth, that left 1,000 dead, $1 billion in damages. And so what we're doing here at the bank is we are increasing climate and weather observation for extreme events, but we are also supporting operations for emergencies. We have a special relief fund that provides an immediate $1 million to countries that are in distress from extreme events, from the impacts of extreme events, and they can come for a second cycle and request another $1 million for a second opportunity if those extreme events persist. We also have now a recovery special purpose vehicle that we have designed and developed here at the bank on disaster risk financing that we call AdRIFI, that is working with the Africa Risk Capacity to provide a pool of sovereign insurance products where countries can join, pay the premiums, and request payouts whenever they suffer from the impacts or the damages, loss and damages from extreme events. So that's one way we're focusing on that. Secondly, we're closing the gap on the weak data capacities. My colleagues at WMO will tell you that 54% of surface stations in Africa and 71% of the upper air observations cannot report accurate data. So this aspect of that Philippe presented on basic observation, observations, which is observations, data, and the interface with users, is not well developed in many African institutions, in many African countries, and especially within our national meteorological and hydrological services. So we are working through the Global Hydromet Alliance together with other alliance partners to make sure that we work with WMO to support countries to achieve compliance, GBON compliance. Third, we're modernizing facilities and equipment. We're supporting the acquisitions of high-performance computers and servers, computer clusters that can provide detailed modeling, regional retransmission stations that are linked to Earth observation data for numerical weather prediction. Four, we are also supporting efforts to scale up climate and weather information services, increasing the surface-based observation. Within the last 4 or 5 years, we have supported the installation of nearly 120 stations in 17 countries. This is a small set of stations, but it's very critical in contributing to the basic observations within the countries. Fifth, we're building the capacity for the delivery of climate and weather early warning, training scientists, providing support and grant financing for weather forecasting and modeling experts, and also for supporting the national partnerships, or what we call under the GFCS, the national platforms for climate services. So the ClimDev Fund and the AfDB is a significant player in this area. And we're working with other partners to deliver a new state-of-the-art sort of a group of solutions that African countries can tap into. We're coming together to create what we call the Systematic Observation Financing Facility. There will be a new facility that will provide for countries to tap in resources that can help them not just to build the basic observation networks, but also to sustain those over time. Let me give a few more comments on financing climate and weather services. When we do an analysis of the current portfolio of the Hydromet Alliance members, we see that at least $2.5 billion is going towards foundational investments. But this is embedded mainly in large climate adaptation projects and resilience projects. Around 20% of these investments is dedicated to strengthening weather observation systems. And we are learning now that improving local observation is good, but there are still weaknesses in data systems. And this represents a lost opportunity for us. A lost opportunity because it provides also sustainability challenges. Therefore, we think having a robust financing mechanism is a way to address this gap, and is also a way to seek sustainable financing. Basic observation in Africa requires an increase in the available surface-based and Redison data generation and sharing by nearly a factor of 8 to 10 times. We see that the collection of Redison data is improving by 50% when we look at the data between 2015 and 2020. But that from surface-based applications or surface-based observations is only improving by 9%, which is quite small. And even with the Redisons, if you consider the impacts of the COVID-19, where we had a huge impact on the aviation and marine transport industries, we find that information collected by aircraft dipped almost 90% for the global south. And therefore, this represented a huge gap for Africa. We have to think going forward how we're going to address this gap. Let me mention two challenges that the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services face. One is the limited capacity to develop large-scale observing systems projects. And the second challenge that they're facing is related to budget constraints. And Aram, I think, has spoken about this. In terms of operation and maintenance, staffing, training, equipment, fuel, transport, etc. So we are happy to help build capacity to access financing, but also to develop sustainability models that can address cost recovery, including with focus-based financing, and also encouraging countries to form what we call national climate funds for long-term access of support to develop their national meteorological and hydrological services. Let me wind up by just briefly sharing with the participants what the situation looks like now in terms of the portfolio of the Hydromet Alliance members. At the Adaptation Fund, in 2020, their portfolio is about $150 million. And a lot of this is dedicated on early warning systems and disaster risk reduction, which are funds that are going to support not just the basic services that we talked about, but also to support build the capacity to access funding from larger entities such as the Green Climate Fund. At the Climate Investment Fund, they have a portfolio of about $200 million, which is mainly in projects for Hydromet investments and capacity building. And they're able to leverage an additional $144 million to support the $200 million investment. At the GCF has been able to, by this year, 2020, make grants totaling about $877 million that is dedicated to Hydromet investment. And 13% of that is going to observing systems. There is an additional $1.8 billion in co-financing that the GCF is able to mobilize with that portfolio of projects that is being supported this year. And we know from interactions with the GCF that they are on a trajectory to mobilize an additional $2.2 billion USD by 2030 in their medium-term framework, which will perhaps provide another $1.2 to $1.5 billion that will be dedicated towards climate and weather observation systems. So there's a significant pot there in the next 10 years or so that we should be thinking how to access, or we should be thinking how to support countries to access that particular pot. At the Global Environmental Facility, they're currently implementing about $369 million of investments to support Hydromet. And that constitutes already 20% of the GEF portfolio. So you can see that within the GEF portfolio, a significant amount is going towards Hydromet investments. Here at the AfDB, as I mentioned earlier on, we made a provision of about $366 million in project finance to support Hydromet. In project finance, and $70 million of that has gone directly to support Hydromet. But we are thinking that we can mobilize an additional $25 billion in climate financing by 2025. And we are very excited to work with many of you in African countries to make sure that we increase that share of $70 million to a larger share of the amount that will be mobilized by the bank through to 2025. Quickly, let me also say that there are other Hydromet Alliance partners that are providing opportunities for financing, $200 million by UNDP, a quarter of which is going directly to support Hydromet, and they are planning to raise an additional $100 million between now and 2030. WFP has put in a small component of $4.8 million. WMO itself has mobilized about $114 million, and the World Bank through the PPCR has about $1 billion, 30% of which is going directly to support observing systems. And there are other smaller components such as WISER and CRUISE, which are supporting the development of weather early warning systems in African countries. So I think they're big.
James, I would appreciate if you could wrap it up in the next minute.
Yes, 10 seconds, Abu Bakr. I think my last point is, I think there are big opportunities for us to work together to build the capacity across across countries to help to mobilize these resources from these entities, because these are monies that are made available to support the critical sectors of weather early warning, understanding that Africa is bearing the brunt of climate change impacts. So I think, please let us work more closely. Let us reach out to each other. We're willing to continue to work with ICPAC to share lessons with the countries and to create those opportunities for access to these entities so that we channel more resources to our countries to support weather early warning system. Thank you very much, Abubakar.